Most people go through life believing that their strength comes from food, sleep, motivation, or external success. But there is an ancient idea, a far more controversial idea, that claims something deeper is at the center of human potential. That idea is this: your sexual energy is not just biological, it is creative force itself. And if it is understood, preserved, and transformed, it can reshape the mind, the body, and even consciousness. The mystic teacher, Samael Weor, referred to this process as the transmutation of energy, and he claimed something extraordinary, that through the conservation of sexual energy, the human brain begins a process of regeneration. Not physical regeneration in a medical sense, but something far more subtle, a restructuring of perception, awareness, and mental clarity. According to his teachings, most human beings are constantly leaking energy, mentally, emotionally, and physically. In his view, this loss of energy weakens attention, clouds judgment, and traps the mind in repetitive patterns. But when that energy is conserved and redirected inward, something begins to change. He described the human being as having three centers of intelligence. The first is the intellectual brain, responsible for thinking and logic. The second is the emotional brain, responsible for feeling, desire, and reaction. And the third is the instinctive and physical brain, responsible for movement, survival, and habit. Most people, he said, live completely controlled by these three centers, without awareness. Thoughts come and go without control. Emotions rise and fall like storms. Habits repeat automatically. But when energy is stabilized, when internal discipline is developed, the mind begins to quiet, and in that silence, something new emerges. Clarity. Not forced clarity, but natural awareness. Samael Weor described this as the beginning of psychological regeneration, a process where the mind stops being fragmented and starts becoming unified. In modern terms, you could think of it as the shift from scattered attention to deep focus, from emotional reactivity to emotional control, from instinctive impulse to conscious action. He believed sexual energy was the raw fuel behind this transformation, not because it is good or bad, but because it is powerful. And like any powerful force, it can either be wasted unconsciously or directed intelligently. In this philosophy, when the energy is conserved, it rises inwardly. The mind becomes more alert, dreams become more vivid, attention becomes sharper, even perception of reality begins to feel different, more present, more intense. He called this gradual process the awakening of consciousness. Now, whether one interprets this literally or symbolically, the underlying message remains the same. Mastery over impulse creates mental strength. Because the truth is, most people do not lack intelligence. They lack control over their own energy. They know what they should do, but they don't feel able to do it consistently. They have goals, but their attention is fragmented. They have discipline in short bursts, but not stability. And so life becomes a cycle of intention and distraction. The teachings of Samael Weor challenge this cycle by suggesting that real transformation does not begin outside the mind. It begins inside the management of energy itself. He even suggested that what we call willpower is directly connected to how energy is handled in the body and mind. When energy is scattered, willpower is weak. When energy is conserved, willpower strengthens naturally. Over time, this creates what he described as a superior state of being, not in a fantasy sense, but as a human who is more aware, more present, and less controlled by impulse. But this path is not portrayed as easy. In fact, it is described as deeply challenging. Because it requires observation of oneself, it requires restraint where impulse once ruled, and it requires awareness in moments where habit normally takes over. And yet, according to this teaching, that is exactly where transformation begins. Not in perfection, but in awareness. Not in suppression, but in conscious direction. So the real question becomes not whether this idea is accepted or rejected, but whether a person is willing to observe their own energy and see how it affects their mind, their focus, and their life. Because if consciousness can be trained and energy can be directed, then the human being is not fixed. They are capable of change, deep change. And perhaps that is what was meant by regeneration, not becoming something supernatural, but becoming fully awake within oneself.